Hello and welcome to Dice & Demons, I'm Emma, and today I'm going to show you how I paint the Wrecka crew from the Brutal and Cunning Kill Team box set that Games Workshop kindly sent my way. And I must say I've been in love with these models ever since they were first previewed, so to actually get the chance to paint them, and then of course in some really bright neon colors, it was just an absolute blast. So I started off with a model that's been primed using the White Scars primer from Citadel, and then I painted the skin with these two speed paints from the Army Painter, Forest Sprite and Shamrock Green. It's about a 50-50 mixture of those two. I usually use Warp Lightning contrast paint from Citadel when I'm painting my Orcs skin tones, but I was running really low on that and I didn't feel like going out to buy some more. Here in Denmark it's really cold and dark and wet, and so I just decided to go with the colors I already had, and I think these two colors together, they work out just fine. This army is something I've been working on for the past 4 or 5 years, so the models don't all look the same anyways. Both my style of painting and my color choices have changed over the years, so it doesn't matter too much. And the whole idea anyways with the Bubblegum Boys is that I want to have an army that's fun and that makes me smile when I put it on the tabletop. Then for the pants I go with Iyanden Yellow, which is a contrast paint from Citadel. And despite what I just said, this is actually the color I use for, I think, more or less all of my orc models across the entire army. And the reason for that is both because I think yellow pants are cool, but also because I like there to be just some sort of sense of order in the chaos that is the crazy colors I use for the Bubblegum Boys, and also because then I have one less decision to make when I try to work out exactly what the color scheme on any particular unit or model is going to be. The same idea goes with the Kroxigor scales that you can see me using here for the loincloth. I usually paint the largest pieces of fabric on any given orc a turquoise color. Usually it's actually a thematic blue, but I decided to go with Kroxigor scales because I wanted just a little bit more contrast between light and dark. But again, the same with the yellow. This is something that you'll see across the entire army, and that just makes it look slightly like there is an overall idea and that they have a bit of cohesion between them, even though they are wildly different. Then for some of the armor plates, I am going with Sigval Burgundy, another contrast paint from Citadel. Again, I usually use Volupus Pink, which is a lighter and slightly more reddish tone, but I really want a little bit more contrast, so that's why I'm trying to use these darker versions of the same type of colors. Then I go with some red. This is Blood Angels Red, also a contrast paint, and I use that as also a major spot color on this unit. So some of the bigger armor plates will be painted either pink or red, and then I have a couple of other spot colors that will come in later on, but those are mostly used for smaller pieces. One of those colors is purple, and this is Luxion Purple, another contrast paint. And the reason I'm using that is both because I thought it would look fun with the overall color scheme, and if I have a chance to include purple, I probably will. And also because, I mean, this is an orc kill team, they could probably use a little bit of extra sneakiness, I guess. I don't know, I just think purple is a really fun color to use. Then I also used a little bit of blue, again because I think it fits well with the rest of the colors, and also because there is nothing wrong with making your kill team a little bit more lucky now that they are also really fast and really sneaky. So all the base colors are in, and now it's time for the fun part, which is adding all the details to the model. So I grabbed my Akhelian green contrast paint, which is a sort of darkish turquoise color, and with that I start painting in some small diagonal lines on the lower half of the armor plate here, and I use this cross-hatching to illustrate a shadow on the armor plate. I also use the same color to paint a sort of relatively thick, it's not an edge highlight, it's like a dark outline at the edge of the armor plate. And I do this to sort of underline the shape and the separation between the different shapes of the model, both because I think it looks cool and has sort of a nice graphical look to it, but also because I think it makes the model really easy to read once it's on the tabletop and 3 feet away. I use the same color to add some shadow to the cloth sections of the models, but I don't do cross-hatching here, and that's not because cross-hatching doesn't work for a cloth. In fact, it works really well to add some texture to cloth, but I want to make sure that there is a difference between the texture, the feel of cloth versus armor plates on this model, and as I've decided that I want the cross-hatching to be on the armor plates, I don't want to use the exact same painting technique on the cloth. You could definitely do it the other way around, but I just enjoy painting the armor plates on my orc models a lot more than I enjoy painting their trousers and t-shirts, for instance, and the cross-hatching technique is quite a bit more time consuming to paint than just the really quick shadows that I added on the loincloth, for instance. And so it's just a matter of preference and me trying to be just slightly mindful of how I spend my painting time, making sure that I find most of the time I spend painting my models as fun as I possibly can. Then I also use the same technique on the red armor plates, except that here I am using a brown contrast paint. This is Gore-Grunta fur, and the reason I'm using a brown contrast paint instead of the dark turquoise color is that dark turquoise on top of red tend to look almost black, and even though I really enjoy sharp contrasts, I think it's slightly too much for the red. It sort of overtakes it a little bit, and so that's why I'm going with the brown instead. Next up, I pick up some Gryph-Hound orange contrast paint, and I use that for adding some shadow to the trousers. And as I said, this is not the part of the painting process that I find the most fun, and it's not a part of the model that I particularly want to focus my attention on or spend a lot of time on. So I just add some shadows and a little bit of definition and a little bit of visual interest real quick, and then I quickly move on to the next step. Then it's time to start adding the highlights, and the first color I'm using is Mephiston Red from Citadel, and I use the exact same technique as I did for adding these shadows, those diagonal lines, to get the effect of cross-hatching. And I used the Mephiston Red, which is a sort of nice standard red color, on about, I would say, 80% of the surface or something like that. I find that when you do cross-hatching for adding shadows and highlights like I do here, the more layers you have on top of each other, the better the results sometimes get. So I paint the Mephiston Red even on the very top of the shoulder plate, where I actually want the brightest highlight colors to also be. Then as the second highlight color, I'm using this fluorescent paint from Huge Miniatures called Glacier Red. And it's a really nice bright color. It's a little bit more almost like a peach color than a really true red, but I think it has something to do with the properties perhaps of fluorescent paints. And anyways, I think it works really well on top of something like Mephiston Red, which gives this sort of really nice proper red undertone. I also use these same colors to paint an edge highlight. I used the Mephiston Red for painting all around the armor plate, and then I used the Radar Red for accentuating the top of the armor plate, and then also any type of angles or sharp corners or anything that I want to draw your attention to make sure that the armor plate is as easy to read from a distance as I can possibly make it. There is also the teeny tiny little detail that I really, really love edge highlighting. I think it's so satisfying. It's like a form of meditation or something to me. I know I'm a little bit weird, but there you have it. Then the last color I'm using for highlighting the red is an orange color, also from Huge Miniatures, and this one is called Laser Orange. Next up, I start working on the pink highlights, and for that I'm using a mixture of these two colors, the pink pigments from Green Stuff World and then the Pulsewave pink from Huge Miniatures. And together these two just create a really bright, vivid pink color that is both fairly easy to work with and has the sort of punch that I am looking for in a pink color. So when you use pigments like this, my experience is that they give really good coverage, but that they also tend to just look a tiny bit fuzzy if you use them on a big flat surface. But using them for cross-hatching like this, it's completely perfect, and you'll hardly notice that the paint is not quite as smooth as sort of paints that have been mixed on a factory scale, where it's like completely perfect compared to something that I have just mixed by hand. But for stuff like this, smaller details, it will absolutely do the trick. Compared to the Mephiston red that I used as the first layer of highlights for the red armor panels, this pink color is of course much more vibrant and almost like more extreme in a way. And I don't really mind that, because I think it also adds a little bit of visual interest that the red, while it is still vibrant and it's still painted with fluorescent colors, is just slightly more toned down compared to the pink. For the second layer of highlights, I am using these two colors just mixed with a little bit of white. And then I am using that the exact same way I used the radar red for the red armor plate, for the most extreme highlights on top of the armor panel, and then also for some of the edge highlighting where I have something that I really want to draw your attention to. Then for the turquoise highlights, I am using a mixture of quantum green and blaster blue, both from Huge Miniatures, as you can see here. And I use these two colors because I don't have a turquoise fluorescent color, and I really want the turquoise to also be painted with fluorescent colors, because then they will glow under a UV light, which serves absolutely no practical purpose whatsoever, but I just think it's fun and cool. And since I am mainly painting these models because I want to have fun with it, I will use as many fluorescent colors as I possibly can. And again, I am using these colors in exactly the same way as I use the red and pink colors. And again, for the brightest highlights, I just add a little bit of white paint to the mixture. For highlighting the blue details on the model, I am using the blaster blue from Huge Miniatures on its own. And then, of course, for the second layer of highlights, I am just mixing it with a touch of white. I really like adding blue to models such as this. The only thing is, it would be so much more fun if you could get a really bright fluorescent blue color, but I don't really think they exist. But if they do, and you know how to find them or how to make them, please let me know, because if I could make a blue that popped as much as the pink, that would be awesome. But I'm guessing there is probably some sort of like scientific reason or something for why that is probably not possible. But I mean, if it is, let me know. That would be really cool. The purple is then also highlighted with a fluorescent color from Huge Miniatures, and this one is called Ultraviolet. And again, the same goes for purple as for blue. It is a little bit difficult to really find a purple that pops as much as a fluorescent green or pink color does. And that's why I actually often tend to highlight like the last most extreme highlight of a purple piece. I sometimes use pink for that, just to make sure that it pops a little bit more. But here, where I have pure pink parts of the model, I don't want to confuse the two. So instead, I'll just settle for some more of the purple paint, just mixed with a little bit of white. Then it's time to start working on the skin, and the first colors I'm using is a mixture of Moot Green and Warp Lightning for the first layer of highlights. And I could definitely add some more shadow to the skin and make it a little bit more visually interesting. But as with the clothing for the orcs, the skin is not the part that I am most interested in working on. So I try to sort of walk a thin line between something that is fairly quick to do and something that I'll still be pleased with and happy to look at. After the first layer of Moot Green mixed with Warp Lightning, I am then just using the Moot Green on its own. And I try to keep the paints fairly thin so that they will go on relatively smoothly. At the same time, it's not like it's a proper glaze. I think I will perhaps be painting over this once or twice to get decent coverage, but it's not something that I'm going to invest huge amounts of time in. Again, this is for a tabletop, and I am painting what I find the most fun, or at least spending the most time painting the fun parts of the model. And yeah, the skin is just not really it for me. Then I mixed the quantum green that I also used with the blaster blue for creating the highlights for the turquoise parts of the model. And I'm mixing that into the moot green for the third layer of highlights. And instead of trying to get something that is really, really smooth, I just painted on in thin horizontal lines so that they sort of move across the direction of the muscle structure. And I think, again, it's not completely smooth, and you could definitely do much better blends and transitions. But for something like this, I think it actually works better than trying to create the illusion of something really smooth. Then I add some texture, and since it goes across the direction of the muscle, I actually think it works fairly well as something that could kind of believably be skin. As the fourth highlight, I used the quantum green on its own, and then as the fifth and final highlight, I used this Starfire yellow, as you can see here. And I think I considered when I was painting this if it was a little bit almost too desaturated, because all of the fluorescent green and yellow colors are a little bit desaturated, or a little bit very bright. It looks very bright, and so I considered whether or not I should give it a wash of something like striking scorpion green or whatever, which might also help to smooth out the blends a little bit. But then I decided against it. I felt, it's good enough, and good enough is completely fine. And of course, if you don't want to spend as much time painting a model as I do on this one, as long as it's not gray plastic, I mean, it's always much cooler than it was before, right? So don't feel like this is me saying, oh, you have to paint something to this level before it's acceptable. Anything that's painted is always much more fun than gray plastic. Then for highlighting the pants, I am using Flash Gitz yellow, and again, like when I was adding the shadows, this is just something that I do really quickly, just to make sure there's a little bit of difference between light and shadow, and just a little bit of visual interest, and then that's completely fine. It's good enough, it's good to go, and it's quick and easy, which is exactly what I want. Then as the final highlight color for the pants, I'm using Wraithbone. And the reason I'm using Wraithbone and not, for instance, the fluorescent yellow color from Huge Miniatures is because all of the fluorescent colors have a slightly colder tone to them, and I want the pants to look a little bit warm, because that will again be a bit of a contrast to the rest of the model, and also add a little bit of extra visual interest. Since these are orc models, I think it's quite appropriate if they have some checkers on them, so I'm just really quickly going to show you how I go about creating that. And so I just take a pencil and I start drawing in the shapes. And as you can see, I'm not being really specific about exactly how big they are. They don't have to be exactly the same size. I mean, this is for orcs, so if they're a little bit off, then I think it more or less just fits with the whole theme of the orcs anyway. Then I start painting it with Gryph-Charger Grey, which is also a contrast paint. These checkers are going to be black and white, but the process for making them are exactly the same no matter what the colors are. I then use a contrast paint called Black Templar's contrast paint to paint half of the checkers. And the reason I'm using this exact paint is because it's a little bit less dark in color than the Black Legion contrast paint, for instance. And I want to make sure that I can add some shadows to the black checkers, so that's why I want the first color to be not too dark. I also use the same color to add some shadows to the gray checkers, and I just use, as you can see, these small quick diagonal lines to add the shadows here, and I just make sure that they all go in the same direction and are placed on the same part of the squares to make sure that there is just a little bit of cohesion going on. Then I grab the Black Legion contrast paint and do exactly the same for the black squares. For highlighting the black squares, I use this paint from Army Painter Uniform Grey. It's one of their older paints. And again, I use the same diagonal lines just on the upper half of the squares, and to sort of illustrate that this is where you might imagine that light would be hitting them. Again, this is not at all supposed to look natural or anything, but I think it has a fun graphical pattern, and I just really enjoy painting stuff like this. I also, as you can see, add some highlights here at the top of each square, and then also at the one side where you also have the diagonal lines from the highlights hitting the squares. And then I just repeat the process, just this time with another color. This one is Glacier Blue from Vallejo, which is a really nice, cold, frosty looking color, and that I think works really well as a highlight for something that is intended to be a very light gray or almost white. Lastly, I go back to the Black Legion contrast paint, and I use that to try to retrace the original lines between the checkers to make sure that it looks as neat and tidy as I can make it without, spending hours and hours fixing teeny tiny mistakes. I think this process definitely works well enough for tabletop models, and I think it's not too difficult to achieve, and I also think it's quite enjoyable to paint. I try to make sure that I don't paint over on top of the edge highlights that I made, so that I have as much difference between light and shadow on these checkers as I can possibly get. Of course, this is a bit of an elaborate process to get checkers. You could definitely just do with the black and white or gray squares, and then just perhaps paint this black line in between to make sure that everything stands out and looks sort of tidy. It's just, again, this is something that I find fun to do, but if you want to do it with just one or two colors and no highlights, I think it would still look really cool. And here, of course, you can see the finished models. I had a lot of fun painting these guys. I think this kill team is a lot of fun, and it's really, really cool. Every time there is something new for the orcs, it's of course amazing. And yeah, this was just a pure orky perfection, I think. I also think the color scheme works pretty well. They look silly, they look fun, and they are very, very colorful. And that is that is everything I want the bubblegums to be. And then lastly, of course, you get the pictures of what the models look like under a UV light. And as I've said many times before on this channel, it has absolutely no practical value whatsoever. It's just something I find hilarious, and I really look forward to it every time I'm painting something. I really want to see what it's gonna look like when I flash the UV light on them. I never use the UV light while I'm painting. I save it for last. It's sort of a special treat, a way of of keeping myself motivated to get everything done so that I get to do this. It's like the cherry on top, I think. And as always, before you leave, I would just like to take the opportunity to thank the wonderful people who support Dice and Demons over on Patreon. So thank you so much to Thomas Madsen, Jordan Hollands, Queen's Wolf, Double J's Terrain, Mola, Steve Eberly, Nassim Makaya, Andrew Correa, Anthony Paul Castro, Gwenna L, Jen Kroger, Bosworth the Rogue, Mando Project, Starcon85, S. Bear, Echinocicus, Elliot Philby, Dr. Tom Zimbardo, Cyberfossil, Cinnamon Coffee 87, Terrainery, Joshua and Anya Pavelsik, Charlie Robertson, and VT Knight 007. If you would like to also support Dice and Demons, you can do so over on Patreon, and I will leave a link down in the show notes. Remember, if you want to stay up to date on my painting projects, you can do so over on X and on Instagram, where you can also find me as Dice and Demons. So if you have any sort of questions or suggestions or anything you would like to see for future videos, please let me know in the comments, and I will do my very best to get back to you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!